Okay guys, so we're in the midst of an economic recession and I think it's time to talk about more affordable lenses. This is a good place to start as any. It's the Nikon 28-80 3.3 to 5.6 G lens. Okay, not the D lens, this is the G lens. It's available used for 40 bucks. It's also available in black, so this is the silver version I have here. I prefer the silver version just because it looks a bit more ridiculous. The black version actually makes you look like a serious photographer. This one doesn't. I picked this one up for $35 and it came with a film camera. Let me show you the camera it came with. So Nikon bundled this lens, 28-80, with the f55, f60, f65 film cameras. So if you look for those cameras, you'll often see them attached to this lens. So this lens is perfect for hobbyists, amateurs, people like me who are not professionals, who don't make money with photography and who want just a very small light lens to walk around with during the daytime. So on the positive side, the lens is really cheap. As I mentioned, it's small. I mean, this thing is tiny. It's very light, 190 grams or 7 ounces, so you barely notice that it's there. Okay guys, so this is what the lens looks like compared to the 50 1.8G. As you can tell, I mean, the 50 is already tiny. Weighs almost nothing, and these guys are almost the same size and weight. So you get a very useful zoom range, 28-80, for the same size and weight as a 50. Another plus is these two lenses actually share filter size. They're both 58mm. So if you have filters for the 50, they're going to work just fine on this guy. The lens is also quite sharp. Actually, there's a long blog entry written on the Nikon website by the designer of the lens, Mr. Sato, and he goes into the design philosophy and the thinking behind the lens. Basically, they were trying to build the most minimalistic kit lens, but the focus was always on sharpness. It's got a very useful zoom range, 28 all the way to 80, so good for street, walk around, general day-to-day. You can think of this as a scouting lens, something to walk around with when you don't quite know what you'll be shooting. Another plus is the lens has a very small minimum focus distance, so you can focus as close as 35 centimeters or just over a foot. I mean, it's not a macro lens, but you can get pretty close to stuff. One other benefit to this lens is if you can take great shots with the 28-80, you will greatly trigger the various gearheads and, you know, MTF chart enthusiasts out there, all those guys on the forum who are obsessed with sharpness and the extreme corners and all that. Okay, the downsides. This thing is plasticky. That's what you get if you want a lens that weighs 190 grams. So I don't really see any metal parts. The mount itself is plastic, so this is a sensitive part of the lens. There are no features to this lens, okay? There are no buttons, there are no distance windows, there's no aperture ring. This is as stripped down as you can get. There's not even a manual focus or autofocus switch. You got to do that in camera. Obviously, it's a slower lens. Takes you to 5.6 on the long end. So if you're looking for an indoor event lens, wedding lens, this isn't going to cut it. I mean, for outdoor events where you can shoot in good light at f8 or f5.6, this thing might actually work. But if you're looking for low light shooting, this lens isn't going to do it. The bokeh, I knew you would ask. There really isn't any bokeh to talk about. I mean, yeah, there are out of focus areas, but they're nothing special. In fact, there's just nothing special about the rendering of this lens. So this is what the lens looks like on a D750. Obviously, you can already tell that this is a bit of a funny combination. This could have the positive effect of making you look less conspicuous. I mean, you're not really going to look that much less conspicuous. You already have a big camera, but at least this makes you look a bit hipsterish. People might think this is a film camera setup. Maybe if someone is thinking about mugging you, they're going to think twice. You know, on one hand, you have a nice camera, but on the other hand, you're shooting with a variable aperture zoom, so they may take some pity on you. Let me just show you how quickly it focuses. Okay, so this is me actually confusing the lens with a white wall. Kind of sounds like a model toy train when it focuses. It's not the sexiest sound a lens can make, but in practice, in day to day, I find that it focuses quite quickly. Now, the way I like to use this lens, I shoot in manual mode, except I let the camera decide the ISO. So what I do is I set it to manual mode with auto ISO, aperture to f8. This is where the lens performs the best. F8 to f11 is its sweet spot. Set the shutter speed to something like 1/200 and let the camera decide the ISO. Now I'm indoors, so it's going a bit crazy with the 8000 ISO right now, but in good light, and you know that it's going to be 100, 200, 400, something like that. And then as the day changes, the conditions change, maybe it gets cloudier, the ISO will just update. And the only thing I worry about is the zoom. So I only want to change one variable at a time when I'm going to walk around. So the sweet spot of this lens, we actually know what the sweet spot of this lens is. We don't have to argue with each other because the designer of the lens, Mr. Sato, wrote a long article in detail about how, you know, where this lens performs best. And if you want sharpness across the whole frame, you're going to have to set it to f8. If it's between 28 and 50 millimeters, once you start getting into the longer end, the sweet spot would be f11. Now in practice, I found that f8 throughout the zoom range was plenty. I don't bother with manually focusing this lens. It's not really fun to manually focus. You can certainly do it. You have to switch it in camera first, and then manually focuses like this. These are some sample images I've taken with the lens, just walking around. I was more than happy with the results. These images are straight out of camera, JPEGs, no editing, no contrast, no saturation, funny business. I was actually pretty surprised with how sharp this lens was. So unless you're pixel peeping and comparing brick walls, I think you'll be okay. Yeah, there's distortion both at the wide and the long end. It's easily correctable in software. There isn't a profile in Adobe Camera Raw, but there is in Affinity Photo, Darktable, Raw Therapy, basically all these programs that use the Lens Fund database, and I'll link to that in the description. If you're trying to save money on camera lenses because you blew all your money on a camera body, classic mistake, I think you could do a lot worse than this guy for 40 bucks. So here are a couple of shots I took at night, and this is an example of how not to do night photography, guys. You want to make sure you have enough light, because if you try to push shadows from an underexposed shot, as I've done here, you can see there's a lot of noise lurking in the shadows. So I've attempted to shoot handheld at ISO 6400 and above, and you can see what happens. Now we can mess with the saturation and colors a bit and say it was an artistic choice, but really it wasn't. So if you're using this lens at night, I would recommend a tripod or a steady surface to get slower shutter speeds. Okay guys, last tip, pro tip. If you have lenses with plastic mounts such as this one on your camera, never pick up the camera by the lens because it's plasticky, so always pick it up by the camera just to be safe. If you have experience shooting this lens, let us know in the comments. Maybe you think it's a piece of junk, maybe you think it's not even worth the $40. Would love to hear your thoughts, especially if you've used it on a higher resolution camera body like the D810, D850. Alright, so thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.